All right, CNT125 Wireless LAN Lab. We just got done configuring our router. So we actually have the switch configured. We have the router configured. Now we're going to start getting a few of our devices in the network configured and powered up, if you will. And we're going to start checking to see if they're getting IP addresses and they're able to get to the ISP. That's where we are. So let's start off by powering up the phones over here. I'm going to click on one of the phones. Drag our power cord up there to plug it in and let it power. I'm going to do the other one. Again, remember, we didn't actually configure the phone configuration of the router, but we do have it set up that it should be receiving an IP, and once it gets an IP, it should allow traffic through for the PC down here to get an IP address as well. So we're not going to get a phone number and be able to dial, but at least we're going to get IP addresses and have those in the appropriate VLAN. Alright, so I have the phones powered up. I'm going to let them finish their booting up process. Let's click on the PC. We're going to go to the desktop IP configuration and do DHCP. It might not get an IP address yet. You know, if you hurry, it may not get an IP address. That's okay. We'll come back later and try it again. That is actually getting an IP. I'll go over here. DHCP. This is actually getting a 192.168.32.12. Again, if you see a 169.254, don't panic yet until the phone is done, and then try it again. Maybe try your static and dynamic setting again. So there's my PCs. It is getting an IP address. I'm going to go to my PC. Let's go to the command prompt. Let's do an IP config. And I am getting a 192.168.32 from my 10 VLAN or my 32 subnet. So that makes perfect sense. And I should be able to ping 192.168.32.1, the gateway. So this PC is getting the appropriate IP subnet masking gateway and able to communicate with the gateway. Let's check this guy. IP config. He's getting 32.12, so we should be able to ping 192.168.32.1, the gateway, which I am. Excellent. So these two PCs are in good shape. Let's see what the phones are doing. Looks like the phone is still working on getting everything it needs to. Oh, this one actually does have an IP, 192.168.64.11. So that is getting the IP from the voice VLAN, which is making sense. Let's see where this one is. Oh, this is getting 64.12 now. So that's getting an IP from the voice VLAN as well. So that is making perfect sense. Moving on here, and that's actually what I just did right there. I will now move on to get connection to the ISP. Now, before I do that, if you're getting to this point and the IP addresses are not coming to the phone or the PC, we have a couple things we need to check. So let me just talk you through a process of what I would do to check. I would first start off, check on your switch, make sure that I do have my VLANs correctly associated here to the ports. So make sure you have the access VLAN 10, voice VLAN 20. Make sure that is correct on all your ports. Down here, make sure the VLANs here for 30 are correct on the last handful of ports. Make sure your trunking is on this gigabit 01 port. I'm also going to make sure that this IP is correct and it's not 0.1 and conflicting with the router, so to speak. So make sure this IP address is correct. If all those check out, then you know the switch is not, causing a hiccup in the process. You then move on to the router. The router, you have a few more things to check. It looks like some DHCP stuff was handed out that there's a conflict. So let's look at a show run here. I do want to make sure my scopes are correct. So again, I'm going to go back through a fine-tooth comb, make sure the numbers are right, 32.0 network, 32.1 gateway, DNS server 10.10.10.2 kind of thing. If something here is wrong, issue this first command, IPDHCP pull PC, and just write a new command for whatever's wrong here to replace that information. Plug in the right network or the right default router, the right DNS server, anything in there to fix that. But do use this command first, exactly as you have it typed, IPDHCP pull, capital PC, and then repeat the command in here that's incorrect to replace it. But check all your scopes, make sure they are correct, fine-tooth comb. Moving down through, then check your sub interfaces, make sure the encapsulation and your IP and everything is correct. Again, if there's an error, go back into that interface, redo whatever command is wrong. That should replace it for you. And then down here under these, 10.1q10, IP this, don't forget IP NAT inside on here. And the same is going to go for VLAN 20 interface and VLAN 30 interface. Go through with a fine-tooth comb, check your numbers, make sure all these pieces are in place. When you get to the 001, again, make sure it's IP address DHCP, IP NAT outside. Make sure all of that is correct. If all those things are correct, I should at least be getting IP addresses on my devices. The NAT part down here is what you would check if you're not getting communication to the ISP. Okay, so I'll come back to that in just a minute. If I've checked all those, I should be getting IP addresses on my PCs and my phones here, if you will. So that's the part I would double check. Make sure that all those things I just mentioned are correct. If they are, your devices should be getting IP addresses. And you should be able to ping, again, you should be able to ping your gateway. Ping 192.168. This is 32.1 is the gateway here. I should have no problem doing that. The next step is checking that you have connectivity over to the ISP. So connectivity to the ISP, I'll open up my command prompt here, and I'm going to try to ping over to the web server. And the web server on this guy is 10.10.10.3. So I'll just try a ping to 10.10.10.3 and make sure I do have connectivity. The first one or two might time out. That's not a huge deal. It actually has to figure its path the whole way through the system to there. So the first one or two timeout is not a big deal. Once I start getting replies, I'll repeat that, and then I should start seeing successful replies every time. Then I can actually ping the domain name of the web server. Again, the first one or two might time out until it resolves that name over here with the DNS server, and then we should get successful replies to that address, to that domain name. Again, be patient a time or two. The first one or two has to resolve everything. Then I should get some successes. And then I should be able to open my browser and load the web page. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, so very carefully work through that. If you're not getting the web page or anything loading, again, go back to your router, double check that this stuff is correct. The default gateway and your DNS server, make sure those are correct. Once you've done that, actually the default router here and your DNS server there, once those are correct, now we're going to come down here and check your NAT. Make sure your access list 1 permit is correct. You have the correct network here, subnet here, network here, and inverse mask. Make sure those are correct. Again, if you need to replace something, I would take whatever's wrong out. I would say no access list 1 permit, blah, blah, blah. Whatever's wrong, I would say put a no in front of that, take it out, and then plug in the correct access list 1 permit, blah, blah, blah. And then check this part here, IPNAT inside source list 1 interface, gigabit Ethernet 0/0/1 overload. It's real easy to get the wrong interface in here. You're plugging in the outside interface. So make sure this is then correct. And again, if something's wrong, just put a no in front of it, get the bad one out of there, and put the correct one in. And that should fix your NAT issue. The other thing, again, to check is for NAT, make sure you have your sub interfaces marked with IPNAT inside. Make sure the outside interface is marked with IPNAT outside. And if you miss that, just go back into the interface and plug that command in. And that should fix your connectivity to the ISP issues or your NAT issue. And that's what all these little minders are. I'm trying to remind you of quick little commands there that you'd want to do. But I just talked you through all the things that I would check to get this functioning. Alrighty, so there should get your systems up and getting an IP address and communicating over with the ISP. Alright, make sure all that works before we go any further. The next podcast, we're going to come back and start working on the wireless side of things.